In the center of the boardroom, attention hung over everyone so heavily that not a single person dared to speak above a whisper. Phones were raised, hands trembling, as employees recorded the moment they never imagined would happen in their workplace. At the head of the table stood the elderly man everyone thought they knew. Just yesterday, he walked these same halls pushing a mop bucket, keeping his eyes low while people brushed past him as if he didn't exist. Some ignored him, others joked at his expense, and one woman, Marina, made comments so cruel that even those standing nearby had pretended not to hear. Now the same man she mocked stood in a tailored suit that didn't match the simple worker they thought he was. He slid a thick folder across the table toward her, his expression steady, revealing nothing, and in that instant every assumption they had ever made about him cracked. The room went still as Marina stared at the folder with a kind of fear she couldn't hide. Her face had drained of color, her hands resting flat on the table as though she needed to steady herself from something only she understood. People shifted uneasily in their seats, unsure whether to look at her or the man they had once treated as background noise. The narrator's voice would echo through their memories long after this day was over. Just 24 hours earlier, this man was mopping floors while people ignored him. Some even insulted him. And now, Marina is about to learn who he really is. Before he opened his mouth to speak, every employee sensed that what was inside that folder could pull apart everything they believed about their company. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What was inside that folder would change everything. Long before that boardroom moment, Samir moved quietly through the hallways with the kind of presence people rarely acknowledged. He carried himself with a slight stoop, always wearing the same soft-spoken smile that made him appear older than he probably was. Most employees assumed he was a temporary cleaner hired through an agency, someone filling in until the company found a younger worker willing to take the night shifts. Yet Samir noticed everything: the late-night arguments between managers, the hushed complaints whispered near the elevators, the way certain employees avoided eye contact when speaking about deadlines that didn't make sense. He also paid attention to the smallest habits, such as how certain executives arrived early on days when major decisions were being made. But no one realized he had been observing the office far longer than they thought. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was intention, and every step he took seemed guided by something he kept deeply hidden. Marina, on the other hand, was anything but quiet. Her heels echoed sharply through the corridors, a sound that made people straighten in their chairs as she passed. She carried confidence like armor, though those who watched closely could tell it came from insecurity she refused to confront. She wanted promotions, recognition, and approval at any cost, and she treated the workplace like a battlefield she needed to conquer. Anyone she considered beneath her felt the sting of her comments: small, dismissive remarks, subtle mockery hidden behind a polite smile, and dramatic sighs whenever she believed someone was slowing her down. Samir received more of those sighs than anyone else. When she walked past him, she barely looked in his direction, and when she did, it was with irritation, as though his mere existence disturbed her routine. Yet Samir never reacted. He just watched, listened, and stored information like pieces of a puzzle only he could see forming. The office itself made their dynamic even sharper. It was a place where people competed for attention rather than collaboration, where every achievement felt like a stepping stone to something higher, and every mistake turned into whispered conversations by the break room door. Middle managers clung desperately to their titles, constantly reminding others of their authority while pretending to be supportive. HR often nodded sympathetically at complaints without ever following through, giving the impression of concern while ensuring nothing actually changed. The environment was ideal for people like Marina to thrive, and people like Samir to go unseen. One afternoon, while wiping down a shelf near the executive wing, Samir paused at a framed photo on the wall. It showed several senior employees standing together at a company celebration. His eyes lingered on one face longer than the rest, but before anyone could notice his reaction, he turned away and continued working. And that simple pause carried a question the office didn't yet know to ask. The narrator's voice rises gently here, planting the seed that will pull viewers deeper into the unfolding story. Why did that photo matter to him? Why did a man who pretended to blend into the background react to something so subtly yet so meaningfully? The truth was quietly building beneath everyday routines, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. As the days passed, employees continued their habits. Marina's sharp remarks, the manager's competitive glances, the HR team's selective attention. Through it all, Samir remained steady, never revealing what he was truly thinking. But the question lingered like a whisper that refused to fade. What connection did he have to something hanging publicly on a wall, something everyone else walked past without a second thought? That unanswered detail would later become the thread that unraveled everything the company believed about itself, setting the stage for the twist none of them were prepared for. On Samir's very first day, the mistreatment began in a way that seemed almost casual to everyone except the person receiving it. Marina spotted him standing quietly near the conference room doorway, holding a simple cleaning cloth and waiting for a meeting to end. She walked straight toward him, irritation already forming on her face. Without lowering her voice, she complained that he was too slow in clearing the tables, as if she had been keeping track of his pace all morning. She glanced at his clothes with a dismissive expression, the kind that suggested she believed he belonged far away from anything involving professionalism. Then she made a remark people would remember later for all the wrong reasons. She told him not to touch anything expensive, as though just being near high-value items made him unworthy. A few co-workers shifted uncomfortably, but none said a word. Their silence filled the hallway, amplifying the cruelty of the MO. People nearby exchanged glances, some trying not to laugh, others pretending they hadn't heard enough to intervene. The office had a way of rewarding silence, especially when the target of the mistreatment was someone seen as temporary, replaceable, or unimportant. Marina walked off proudly, satisfied with her display of authority, leaving Samir standing there with only the faint sound of murmured amusement behind her. Yet Samir remained calm, almost serene in the face of the humiliation. When Marina later spilled her coffee on a conference table during a tense discussion with another manager, he stepped in to quietly wipe the mess without being asked. His movements were gentle, unhurried, and carried a sense of patience that didn't match the disrespect he was receiving. The narrator's voice settled over the scene. What Marina didn't know was that every word she spoke, every insult, every whisper, was being noted by someone she should have never underestimated. Over the next few days, small details began to stand out, details that revealed more about Samir than anyone expected. On one morning when the office was unusually busy, Samir stepped aside to jot something down in a small notebook he kept tucked inside his pocket. No one knew what he was writing, but the brief concentration on his face hinted that it was something far more important than a reminder to clean a certain room. Another day he paused outside the break room where several employees were discussing an internal dispute involving budgets and missing reports. He didn't interrupt or make himself known, but he listened carefully, absorbing the tone and content of every word. Employees dismissed him as a harmless background presence, unaware that he was piecing together far more about the company than anyone had realized. Later that week, a small incident revealed another layer of who he was. A loose cable beneath an executive desk had caused several technical problems during video calls, frustrating the department for days. While others complained, Samir knelt down, examined the cable for a few moments, and fixed it with a precision that did not match the job he supposedly held. The executives were surprised, but did not ask questions. They simply assumed he had stumbled into a lucky solution. But the employees who noticed the scene later whispered among themselves, wondering how a temporary cleaner could understand the wiring system better than the technician who had visited earlier. Samir brushed off their curiosity with a polite smile, refusing to reveal more than necessary. His actions raised questions that people pushed aside, not yet ready to confront what those details implied. Small moments continued to add to the puzzle. When new staff joined the office, Samir greeted them by name before anyone introduced them. His memory was sharp, his awareness sharper, and the way he observed interactions showed a kind of intention people didn't associate with his job. One afternoon, he asked a pair of mid-level managers thoughtful questions about the company's structure, questions too specific for someone who was supposedly there only to clean. They dismissed him politely, assuming he was curious in the way some outsiders occasionally are. But the truth was far more complicated. Samir wasn't gathering random information. He was collecting pieces of something much bigger, something only he understood. As the narrator's voice deepened, it left the audience with the same question that slowly began forming in the minds of the employees who truly paid attention. Who was this man really, and what exactly was he preparing for? As the story transitions deeper into the company's interior world, the narrator pulls the audience into a more documentary-style retelling, reflecting on voices from within the organization. One longtime coworker spoke about Marina with a tone that tried to sound neutral but couldn't hide years of complicated feelings. She explained that Marina's ambition wasn't new. It had been building since her first day, growing stronger every time someone praised her results without noticing the people she stepped over to achieve them. Another employee recalled moments when Marina pushed herself into conversations meant for higher-level executives, hoping her confidence alone would secure her the recognition she desperately wanted. These small testimonies painted a picture not of a villain in the dramatic sense, but of someone shaped by an environment that rewarded the loudest voice, often at the expense of the kindest one. Each interview revealed layers of the culture that made Marina who she was. Another employee shared an observation that stayed in the narrator's voice long after he stopped speaking. He admitted that Samir always seemed different, though he could never place why. He described Samir as someone who moved with purpose, yet blended into the physical space so effortlessly that people only noticed him when they needed something picked up or wiped down. But there was something in his eyes, an alertness, a depth, that didn't belong to the role he played. The coworker said that sometimes he felt Samir was studying the office rather than cleaning it, as though he understood more than he let on. These quiet reflections hinted at a truth no one had considered seriously at the time. While Marina fought for recognition, Samir observed quietly, collecting details like pieces of a story he was already familiar with. The narrator lets the audience feel the weight of that contrast, planting another small seed of unease. During an internal discussion, someone from HR spoke in a careful voice, choosing words that sounded polished, but carried a hint of something unsaid. They explained that the company had gone through several internal evaluations over the years, some planned, others unannounced, and each one had exposed issues that leadership preferred not to address publicly. The HR representative vaguely referenced previous scandals involving poor communication, workplace tension, and questionable management practices. While they avoided naming specific individuals, the tone suggested that the problems were far more serious than anyone outside the department knew. Their comments were meant to sound reassuring, but instead they raised new questions. If the company had already faced these challenges, why had nothing changed? And if Samir had been quietly observing everything since the day he arrived, what had he learned that others had chosen to overlook? The narrator shifts the focus to the smaller, more intimate moments that revealed Samir's character, not through words, but through actions. One afternoon, an intern struggled to carry a stack of heavy boxes across the hallway. People passed by without offering help, each absorbed in their own responsibilities. Samir approached silently, lifting half the boxes with steady hands and walking beside the intern until they reached their destination. His kindness wasn't dramatic or performed. It was natural, as if helping someone came as easily to him as breathing. Another day, the receptionist, clearly overwhelmed, juggling phone calls and paperwork during a hectic lunch hour, barely noticed when Samir placed his own unopened lunch on her desk before returning to his duties. She later realized what he had done and searched for him in the hallways, but he never mentioned it again. These small gestures shaped how the audience saw him, revealing a humanity the office had long taken for granted. With each passing moment, the narrator builds the emotional contrast between the culture of the office and the quiet resilience of the man they overlooked. Employees who previously ignored him began recalling little things: how he greeted everyone with the same gentle tone, how he remembered details about their families, how he always stepped aside to avoid making someone uncomfortable. Yet behind all this warmth was a deeper stillness that made people feel he had lived through something they couldn't imagine. His kindness wasn't the product of naivety. It felt like the choice of someone who understood loss, struggle, or perhaps betrayal. And this is where the narrator tightens the curiosity loop, offering a direction without revealing the truth too soon. None of them knew what Samir had survived, or what brought him here. That unanswered question sat beneath every moment, waiting for the right time to rise to the surface. As the documentary tone deepens, the narrator shifts gently into the quieter story that had been unfolding long before Samir stepped foot in that building. Little by little, pieces of his past begin to surface, not through dramatic declarations, but through subtle reflections that carry the weight of memory. Years ago, Samir worked in large corporations, ones known for their polished images and ambitious leadership. He had walked through executive suites, not cleaning them, but meeting inside them. He understood the language of performance reviews, board decisions, and crisis management. Yet he also witnessed how easily people at the top forgot the humanity of those beneath them. The narrator explains that Samir didn't lose his position because of incompetence or lack of effort. Something far more personal had pushed him out of that world. And ever since that moment, he had been moving through workplaces with quiet observation, as if collecting truths no one else wanted to face. The story gently reveals a deeper wound, one that shaped his calm presence and steady kindness. Samir once cared for someone who believed in him with unwavering faith, someone whose encouragement had carried him through the most difficult chapters of his career. But life had a way of taking from people without warning, and the narrator shares that Samir experienced a loss that shifted everything inside him. He did not speak about it openly, yet the silence following that loss filled the space where ambition used to live. He left the corporate world not because he lacked ability, but because returning to those same corridors without that person beside him felt unbearable. As he drifted from job to job, he began noticing patterns. Small acts of cruelty disguised as professionalism, manipulation passed off as leadership, and workplaces that celebrated power more than integrity. And in every building he entered, he recognized hints of the same behavior that once destroyed his own sense of trust. The narrator continues expanding Samir's quiet transformation. After the betrayal he endured, something that cost him more than a title or a paycheck, Samir promised himself he would never allow arrogance to define a workspace again. He carried that promise through every hallway he cleaned, every meeting he overheard, and every interaction where someone dismissed him based on appearance alone. His past wasn't the story of someone defeated, it was the story of someone reshaped. He used humility as a shield, patience as his method, and silence as his greatest advantage. Over the years, he learned that people revealed their true nature when they believed no one important was watching. And so he watched, not for mistakes, but for patterns. Each workplace became another chapter in a quiet study he had been conducting long before stepping into Marina's company. His purpose wasn't revenge. It was understanding the deeper truths people worked so hard to hide.